The autumn rain fell in cold sheets across the Yorkshire moors, turning the narrow dirt path into a river of mud. Eleanor Ashford clutched her soaked cloak tighter around her shoulders, her fine silk wedding gown now hidden beneath layers of rough wool she had stolen from a farmhouse 2 days prior. Her delicate slippers, once pristine white satin meant for the grandest ceremony of the season, were now ruined beyond recognition, caked with mud and torn at the seams. She had been running for 3 days. Behind her, somewhere in the gray distance, her father's men still searched. Lord Ashford would not accept this humiliation quietly. The marriage contract with Lord Pemberton had been signed, witnessed by half the nobility of England. The alliance between their houses would secure trade routes, land, and influence that her father had schemed for years to obtain. Eleanor was merely the currency in this transaction, a well-bred mare to be paraded and handed over, but she had refused to be bought. The towering stone walls of Thornwick Convent emerged through the mist like an apparition from another age. The building stood alone on a rocky outcrop surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and a steep cliff dropping to the sea on the 4th. It was a fortress disguised as a house of God, built centuries ago when the border wars made such precautions necessary. Now it served as a refuge for women who had nowhere else to go. Eleanor stumbled up the final stretch of path, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She had not eaten properly in 2 days, surviving on stolen bread and stream water. Her hands, once soft and carefully tended by ladies' maids, were now blistered and bleeding. But none of that mattered. She was here. She was almost safe. The massive oak door stood before her, iron-studded and imposing. Eleanor raised her fist and knocked, the sound echoing hollowly in the rain. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard the scrape of metal on metal as a small viewing slot slid open. "State your purpose," came a woman's voice, flat and suspicious. "I seek sanctuary," Eleanor said, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." The slot closed. Eleanor's heart sank. But then she heard the heavy sound of bolts being drawn back, and the door creaked open just wide enough for her to slip through. The woman who admitted her was perhaps 60 years old, her face deeply lined, but her eyes sharp and assessing. She wore the traditional black habit of the Benedictine order, her hands work-worn and capable. "I am Sister Margaret," she said, looking Eleanor up and down with an expression that missed nothing. "Come, Mother Superior will decide your fate." Eleanor followed Sister Margaret through a dim corridor lit only by narrow windows set high in the stone walls. The convent smelled of old incense, damp stone, and something else. The peculiar scent of women living without men, of a world entirely separate from the one Eleanor had fled. Their footsteps echoed on the flagstone floor as they walked deeper into the building. They emerged into a small courtyard where a garden struggled against the harsh northern climate. Herbs grew in neat rows, rosemary, thyme, feverfew, tended by nuns who looked up briefly at the newcomer before returning to their work. No one spoke. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of rain and distant waves crashing against the cliffs. Sister Margaret led Eleanor to a small, austere chamber where Mother Superior Agnes waited. The head of Thornwick Convent was an imposing woman in her 70s, her face weathered by time but her posture as straight as a sword. She sat behind a simple wooden desk, her hands folded before her, studying Eleanor with eyes that seemed to see directly into her soul. "You seek sanctuary," Mother Superior Agnes said. It was not a question. "Yes, Reverend Mother," Eleanor replied, dropping into a curtsy despite her exhaustion. Old habits died hard, even in flight. "From what do you flee, child?" Eleanor hesitated. The truth was dangerous. Her family was powerful, connected. If Mother Superior knew who she really was, she might send her away, unwilling to risk the wrath of Lord Ashford. But lying in a house of God felt like another kind of damnation. "From a marriage I did not choose," Eleanor said finally, choosing her words carefully. "From men who see me as property to be traded. From a future where my voice means nothing and my life is not my own." Mother Superior Agnes was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Many women flee to these walls for such reasons," she said at last. "But sanctuary comes at a price. If you stay here, you will work. You will pray. You will live by our rules and our schedule. You will speak only when necessary. You will own nothing, claim nothing, desire nothing beyond what serves God and this community. Can you accept this?" Eleanor thought of her former life. The silk dresses, the jewels, the endless social engagements where she smiled and said nothing of substance. She thought of Lord Pemberton's cold eyes appraising her at their betrothal dinner, the way he had spoken to her father about her as if she were not even present. She thought of her mother's resigned acceptance, her whispered advice to do your duty and think of the family. "Yes, Reverend Mother," Eleanor said, "I accept." "Very well. Sister Margaret will show you to your cell. You will be given simple clothing. Your fine things will be burned. They tie you to your past, and here you must leave your past behind. Tomorrow your work begins. Tonight you will rest. Pray and consider whether this is truly the path you choose." Eleanor wanted to cry with relief, but she held herself together. "Thank you, Reverend Mother. Thank you." Sister Margaret led her back through the corridors to a tiny cell barely large enough for a narrow bed, a wooden chest, and a small table with a basin for washing. A single window looked out over the gray sea, offering no comfort beyond proof that the outside world still existed. "Remove your wet clothing," Sister Margaret instructed, producing a rough woolen shift and a simple brown dress from the chest. "I will bring you bread and water. You will eat, then rest. Tomorrow begins at dawn with lauds, the morning prayers. Do not be late." When Sister Margaret left, Eleanor finally allowed herself to collapse onto the hard bed. She pulled off her ruined cloak and the muddy layers beneath, peeling away the remnants of her wedding dress. The silk was torn and filthy, unrecognizable as the beautiful gown her mother's seamstresses had labored over for months. Eleanor felt no regret as she bundled it into a corner. She dressed in the simple shift and gown Sister Margaret had provided. The fabric was rough against her skin, scratching and uncomfortable. Nothing like the fine linens she was accustomed to, but it was clean, and it was honest, and it belonged to no one's ambitions but her own. The bread and water arrived, brought by a young novice who could not have been more than 16. The girl said nothing, just placed the simple meal on the table and departed with downcast eyes. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring each bite despite the bread's coarseness. She had never appreciated food like this before, as fuel, as gift, as evidence of survival. As darkness fell, Eleanor stood at her small window and looked out at the turbulent sea. Somewhere out there, her father's men still searched. Lord Pemberton would be furious at this insult, his pride wounded by a bride who dared to run. Her family would be humiliated before all of society. But Eleanor could not bring herself to care. For the first time in her 22 years, she had made a choice that was entirely her own. The price would be high. She understood that. This life would be hard, stripped of comfort and privilege, but it would be hers. She thought of her mother, who had never once questioned her own arranged marriage, who had borne 5 children and smiled through decades of loveless duty. She thought of her sisters already being groomed for similar fates. She thought of all the women who accepted what was given to them because they believed they had no other choice. Eleanor had chosen differently. She lay down on the narrow bed as rain battered the stone walls and wind howled around the ancient building. Tomorrow would bring hard work, strict rules, and a life she could barely imagine. But tomorrow, she would wake up free. As sleep finally claimed her exhausted body, Eleanor's last thought was a prayer, not to be returned to her old life, but for the strength to embrace this new one, whatever it might bring. Outside, the storm intensified. The sea crashed against the cliffs with renewed fury. And in the darkness, though Eleanor could not yet know it, forces were already in motion that would soon shatter the sanctuary she had fought so desperately to reach. The Duke's army was marching north, pursuing an enemy who had fled into these same wild lands. Within days, the war that had ravaged the South would arrive at Thornwick's gates, bringing with it a man as haunted and desperate as Eleanor herself, a man whose choices would force her to confront everything she thought she had escaped. But tonight, for one precious night, Eleanor Ashford slept in peace, believing she had finally found safety in the silence and shadows of the forgotten convent by the sea. Eleanor had been at Thornwick Convent for 6 days when the war arrived. She had spent those days learning the rhythm of monastic life, rising before dawn for lauds, working in the kitchen gardens, pulling weeds and harvesting root vegetables, attending the cycle of prayers that divided each day into sacred portions. Her hands, once soft and decorative, now bore calluses and dirt under the nails. Her back ached from hours bent over the soil. But there was a strange peace in the exhaustion, in the simplicity of tasks that required only her body and not her forced smile or practiced conversation. Sister Margaret had taken a particular interest in her, perhaps sensing that Eleanor's background was more refined than she admitted. The older nun never asked questions, but she watched carefully, noting how Eleanor held herself, how she spoke, the way she occasionally forgot herself, and used phrases that belonged to educated nobility rather than common refugees. "You were someone important," Sister Margaret said one afternoon as they scrubbed the refectory floor together. It was not a question. "I was someone's possession," Eleanor replied, wringing out her rag into the bucket. "Now I am no one. It is better this way." Sister Margaret nodded slowly. "Many women come here to become no one, but God has a way of making us into someone new instead. The question is whether you will accept what He makes of you." Eleanor did not know how to answer that, so she remained silent and continued scrubbing. The convent held 23 women in total, 17 nuns who had taken permanent vows, 4 novices still in their training period, and 2 other refugees like Eleanor, who had sought sanctuary in recent months. One was a widow whose husband's family had tried to claim her property by forcing her into another marriage. The other was a young woman who had refused to name the father of her child and fled her village's judgment. Neither spoke of their pasts, and Eleanor did not ask. They existed in a world of women, sealed away from the chaos of men and their wars, their ambitions, their violence. Mother Superior Agnes ruled with firm but fair authority, maintaining the traditions that had kept Thornwick standing for over 300 years. The walls were thick, the doors barred, the location remote. It was as close to invisible as any place could be. Until the morning the Duke's army appeared on the horizon. Eleanor was in the kitchen helping Sister Catherine prepare bread for the midday meal when they heard the bells. Not the gentle church bells that called them to prayer, but the alarm bells. Harsh, urgent, terrifying. Sister Catherine's face went pale. "Inside," she whispered, abandoning the dough. "Everyone inside. Bar the doors." Eleanor followed as the women rushed through the corridors, confusion and fear written on every face. Through the narrow windows, she glimpsed what had triggered the alarm. A column of armed men on horseback, perhaps 40 or 50 strong, emerging from the forest path. They wore the dark blue and silver colors of the Northern Campaign, their armor dented and battle-worn, their faces hard with the brutality of men who had seen too much death. At their head rode a man who commanded attention even from this distance. He sat his black warhorse with absolute authority, his broad shoulders draped in a cloak that had once been fine but now was travel-stained and torn. Even from far away, Eleanor could see the scar that ran down the left side of his face. A pale line from temple to jaw that spoke of violence survived. "It is the Duke of Ravencroft," Mother Superior Agnes said grimly, standing at the main window of her chamber where several nuns had gathered. "I had heard his forces were pushing north in pursuit of Lord Ashford's rebel allies." Eleanor's blood turned to ice at the mention of her father's name. The rebellion in the south had been whispered about even in her sheltered world. A group of lords who opposed the king's new taxes and land reforms. Her father had claimed neutrality, but Eleanor knew better. Lord Ashford always positioned himself on whichever side would bring the greatest advantage. "What does he want here?" Sister Margaret asked. "Nothing good," Mother Superior replied. "Bar all the doors, hide the younger sisters, and pray he moves on quickly." But the Duke did not move on. His men dismounted in the courtyard, their horses stamping and snorting after what must have been a long ride. Eleanor watched from a crack in the shuttered window as the Duke himself approached the main door. He moved like a predator, controlled, alert, dangerous. When he hammered his fist against the oak, the sound echoed through the entire building like thunder. Mother Superior Agnes straightened her habit and went to answer, motioning for the others to stay back. Eleanor could hear the conversation clearly through the stone corridors. "I am Mother Superior Agnes. This is a house of God, my lord. We do not welcome armed men, and I do not welcome traitors who hide behind holy walls." The Duke's voice was deep, rough with exhaustion and something darker, an anger barely contained. "I have intelligence that a man we seek may have taken refuge here. You will open your doors and allow my men to search every room. We shelter only women here, my lord. You have been misinformed. Then you have nothing to hide from a search. The sanctity of this convent means nothing when traitors use it as a shield." There was a pause, then the scrape of steel being drawn. "I do not wish to desecrate holy ground, Reverend Mother, but I will do what I must. Open the doors or we will break them down." Mother Superior Agnes's voice hardened. "You would dare I would dare anything to end this war and bring peace back to this land. How many innocent people have died while men like the one I seek hide and plot? How many villages burned? How many children orphaned? Do not speak to me of sanctity when such evil walks free." Eleanor heard the pain beneath the anger in his voice, and something in her chest tightened with unexpected understanding. This was not a man who enjoyed violence. This was a man who had seen too much of it, and carried the weight of every casualty. Mother Superior must have heard it too, because her tone softened slightly. "You may search, my lord, but I insist your men show respect for this sacred place and for the women who live here. Many have fled violence and abuse. They do not deserve more fear. You have my word." The doors opened, and the Duke's soldiers poured in like a dark tide. Eleanor and the other refugees were herded into the refectory along with the nuns, guarded by 2 men while others searched the building room by room. The soldiers were efficient but not cruel, opening chests and checking behind tapestries without destroying anything unnecessarily. Eleanor kept her head down, her face hidden by the deep hood of her simple brown cloak. She stood among the other women, trying to blend in, to be invisible, but she could feel eyes on her, assessing, measuring. When the Duke himself entered the refectory, the room seemed to shrink around his presence. He was perhaps 35, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair shot through with premature gray and eyes the color of storm clouds. The scar on his face pulled his left eyebrow into a permanent slight arch, giving him an expression of perpetual skepticism. He wore his authority like armor, absolute and unquestioned. He walked slowly along the line of women, studying each face. Most kept their eyes downcast in proper submission. Eleanor did the same, her heart hammering in her chest. The Duke stopped directly in front of her. "You, look at me." Eleanor had no choice but to obey. She raised her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze with as much calm as she could summon. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the shadows under his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as if holding back words that threatened to escape. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor, my lord." She used no family name, claiming nothing that might connect her to Lord Ashford. "How long have you been here?" 6 days, my lord." His eyes narrowed. Despite the simple clothing and her attempts to appear common, something about her speech or bearing had caught his attention. "You are educated." "My mother taught me to read, my lord, before she died." It was partially true. Her mother had overseen her education, even if it had been conducted by expensive tutors. The Duke continued to study her, and Eleanor felt the weight of his intelligence behind that scarred face. He was not a simple brute. He was a man who observed, who thought, who analyzed. "Why are you here?" he pressed. "I fled a marriage I did not want, my lord." Something flickered across his expression, understanding perhaps, or sympathy, but it vanished quickly behind his warrior's mask. "Many women flee unwanted marriages. What made yours worth running to this godforsaken place?" Eleanor felt anger kindle in her chest despite her fear. "Because my godforsaken place is preferable to a man who saw me as property to increase his wealth and status. Because here, at least, no one claims to own me." The Duke's eyebrow, the scarred one, rose higher. "Careful, girl. That sounds dangerously like spirit. Such things are not always valued in women." "Then perhaps men should reconsider their values, my lord." The words escaped before Eleanor could stop them. Several nuns gasped softly. The Duke's expression darkened, and for a moment Eleanor thought she had pushed too far. But then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth twitched upward in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Indeed," he said softly. "Perhaps they should." He moved on, completing his inspection of the assembled women, but Eleanor could feel his attention returning to her repeatedly. She had drawn his notice, and that was dangerous. Men like the Duke were trained to observe, to question, to dig beneath surfaces until they found truth. After an hour of searching, the Duke's men reported finding no trace of their quarry. Mother Superior Agnes stood before the Duke in the main hall, her expression carefully neutral. "You see, my lord, only women, no traitors hiding behind our walls." The Duke nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. "My intelligence was clear. The man we seek was tracked to this area. If he is not here, then where?" Perhaps your intelligence was incorrect, my lord. Or perhaps someone is lying. His eyes swept the assembled nuns one more time, lingering on Eleanor before returning to Mother Superior. Very well. We will make camp in your courtyard for the night. My men are exhausted, and the next defensible position is 2 days' ride north. You will provide us with water and whatever food you can spare. Mother Superior's lips pressed into a thin line. This is highly irregular. So is a war that has already lasted 2 years too long. The Duke's voice hardened again. You will be compensated for your supplies. My men will not enter the building without permission, but we stay the night. Those are my terms. He turned and strode out before Mother Superior could protest further, his cloak swirling behind him like a storm cloud. Through the windows, Eleanor watched as his men began setting up camp in the courtyard, building fires and tending to their horses. They would be here until morning at least. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her cell, listening to the sounds of soldiers beyond the walls. Low voices, occasional laughter, the clang of metal on metal as they maintained their weapons. She thought about the Duke's scarred face and storm-gray eyes, the pain she had heard beneath his anger, the unexpected flash of understanding when she spoke of being seen as property. He was dangerous, not just because of his power and authority, but because he saw too much. If he suspected who she really was, if word reached him about Lord Ashford's runaway daughter, she would be returned to her father like lost property. The marriage contract would be enforced. Her brief taste of freedom would end, but there had been something else in his eyes when he looked at her. Recognition, perhaps, not of her identity, but of something shared. They were both running from something, both carrying burdens that showed in the lines of their faces and the shadows in their eyes. As Eleanor finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. They paused at her cell, and she held her breath, heart racing. But whoever stood there, guard or duke or curious soldier, did not knock. After a long moment, the footsteps moved on, fading back into the night. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Tomorrow the Duke's army would move north, and she would be safe again in the silence of the convent. This was just a storm passing through, nothing more. She tried to believe it. But sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of scarred faces and storm-gray eyes that saw too much, and a voice asking questions she could not afford to answer. The Duke did not leave the next morning. Eleanor woke to the sound of horses and men's voices, expecting to find the courtyard empty. The soldiers departed. Instead, when she peered through the narrow window of her cell, she saw the encampment still in place, now more organized than the night before. Tents had been erected, a proper cooking fire established, guards posted at strategic positions around the convent's perimeter. Something had changed. Something had made the Duke decide to stay. At morning prayers, Mother Superior Agnes's face was tight with controlled anger. After the service, she gathered the women in the chapter house and delivered the news in a voice that trembled slightly despite her attempts at composure. The Duke has received intelligence that his enemy may still be in the area. He has requested— She paused, her jaw clenching, insisted that his forces remain here while they continue their search. We have no choice but to comply. However, I have secured his promise that his men will not enter our private quarters without express permission. You are to avoid contact with the soldiers whenever possible. Is that understood? A murmur of nervous agreement rippled through the assembled women. Eleanor felt her stomach twist with dread. Every additional day the Duke remained increased the chance that someone would discover her true identity. Lord Ashford's men might still be searching for her. Rumors traveled along trade roads and through taverns. If word reached the Duke about a missing noble bride, he would put the pieces together quickly. She needed to become even more invisible than before. For 3 days, Eleanor succeeded in avoiding the Duke entirely. She volunteered for the most menial tasks, scrubbing the privy, hauling water from the well, working in the coldest corner of the vegetable garden where no one else wanted to go. She kept her hood up, her head down, her presence as unremarkable as possible. But on the 4th day, everything changed. Sister Catherine had sent Eleanor to the storage cellar to retrieve preserved vegetables for the evening meal. The cellar was reached through an exterior door on the north side of the building, partially hidden by overgrown ivy. Eleanor descended the stone steps carefully, balancing her basket, breathing in the cool, earthy smell of the underground chamber. She was selecting turnips when she heard voices above, male voices coming closer. Her heart began to race. The cellar had only one exit, and those voices were approaching it. She looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the small space offered nothing but barrels and shelves. The door opened. 2 soldiers descended the steps, talking in low tones. "Check every storage area," he said. "The man we seek could be hiding anywhere. This is a fool's errand. If there was anyone here, we'd have found him by now. Tell that to the Duke. He's convinced the intelligence is good." Eleanor pressed herself against the far wall behind a large barrel, praying the dim light would hide her. But as the soldiers moved deeper into the cellar, one of them spotted her immediately. "You there? What are you doing down here?" I was sent to fetch vegetables for the kitchen," Eleanor stammered, trying to keep her voice steady and common. "Sister Catherine, come out where we can see you properly." Eleanor had no choice. She stepped forward into the better light near the entrance, clutching her basket like a shield. The 2 soldiers studied her with professional assessment, looking for anything suspicious or out of place. "You're the one the Duke spoke with before," the taller soldier said, recognition dawning. "The educated one." Before Eleanor could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "What's happening here?" The Duke himself appeared at the top of the cellar steps, his broad frame blocking most of the daylight. He descended quickly, his boots heavy on the stone. When he saw Eleanor, something flickered across his scarred face. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. "My lord," the tall soldier said quickly. "We were searching the storage areas as ordered. Found this woman collecting vegetables." "Leave us," the Duke commanded. The soldiers exchanged glances but obeyed immediately, climbing back up the steps and closing the door behind them. The cellar suddenly felt very small and very dark, lit only by the thin beam of light from a high ventilation grate. Eleanor's pulse hammered in her throat as the Duke moved closer, studying her with those storm-gray eyes that missed nothing. "You have been avoiding me," he said. It was not a question. "I have been working, my lord, as Mother Superior requires. In the darkest corners, the coldest gardens, the loneliest tasks." He tilted his head slightly. "One might think you were trying not to be noticed." Eleanor forced herself to meet his gaze. "Perhaps I simply prefer solitude, my lord. Or perhaps you have something to hide." The words hung in the cold air between them. Eleanor felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble under the weight of his scrutiny. This man had interrogated prisoners and uncovered conspiracies. He knew when someone was lying. "Everyone here has something to hide," she said carefully. "That is why we seek sanctuary." The Duke took another step closer. He smelled of leather and horses and wood smoke, thoroughly masculine scents that seemed out of place in this female sanctuary. "Tell me something, Eleanor with no family name. That first day when I asked why you fled your marriage, you spoke of not wanting to be seen as property. You used the phrase increase his wealth and status. Those are not the words of a common woman fleeing an unwanted match. Those are the words of someone who understands the politics of strategic alliance." Eleanor's mouth went dry. She had been careless, let too much of her education show through. "My mother taught me." "Your mother taught you to read." "Yes, you said that. But reading is different from understanding the machinery of noble marriage contracts." His eyes narrowed. "Who are you really?" "I am no one, my lord. Just another woman who—" "Stop lying to me." The Duke's voice cracked through the cellar like a whip, sharp with frustration. Eleanor flinched despite herself, and something in that reaction made him pause. He took a breath, visibly controlling his anger, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter but no less intense. "I am tired," he said. "Tired of this war. Tired of chasing shadows. Tired of noble lords who play games with people's lives while peasants die in their fields. I have spent 2 years hunting traitors who hide behind pretty words and ancient rites, and I am done with deception." He moved even closer. So close Eleanor could see the faint silver threading through his dark hair, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. "So I will ask you one more time, and I expect the truth. Who are you?" Eleanor's resolve finally broke. Perhaps it was the weariness in his voice that matched her own. Perhaps it was the recognition that he would dig until he found the truth anyway. Or perhaps it was simply that she was tired too. Tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being afraid. "Eleanor Ashford," she whispered, "daughter of Lord Richard Ashford, betrothed to Lord Henry Pemberton, runaway bride sought by half the kingdom." The Duke went very still. For a long moment, He simply stared at her, processing this revelation and all its implications. Then unexpectedly he laughed, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it. Ashford's daughter, of course. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its already disheveled state. Do you have any idea what finding you means? The political leverage? Your father is suspected of funding the rebellion. Pemberton's family controls 3 major ports. Having you in my custody could make me a pawn again, Eleanor interrupted, anger overcoming her fear. Could turn me back into property to be traded. I know exactly what I am worth to men like you, my lord. That is precisely why I ran. Men like me? The Duke's voice hardened again. You know nothing about me. I know you are a warrior loyal to the king. I know my father opposes the king's reforms. I know that returning me to my family or my betrothed would earn you favor and alliance. That is all I need to know. Is it? The Duke stepped back, creating distance between them, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then let me tell you something about men like me, Lady Eleanor. Let me tell you about the village of Thornfield, where I followed orders to root out rebels hiding among the population. Let me tell you about the woman who lied to protect her husband, and how I had her put in chains until he surrendered. Let me tell you how she died of fever in that prison before her husband confessed that he had no rebel ties at all, that the intelligence was false, that I had destroyed an innocent family for nothing. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, rough with old pain. Let me tell you about the children of Moorwood, orphaned when their village burned in a battle neither side wanted to lose. Let me tell you about the young soldier who begged me to send him home to his mother, and how I ordered him to hold the line, and how he died there because duty demanded it. Let me tell you about all the ways I have followed orders and done my duty, and served my king, and how every night I lie awake seeing their faces. Eleanor stood frozen, the vegetables forgotten in her basket. The Duke's scarred face was drawn tight with anguish, years of accumulated guilt bleeding through the warrior's mask. You think you are the only one who feels trapped by duty? He continued. The only one forced into a role you never chose? I was 15 when my father died and I inherited the duchy. 16 when the king commanded me to lead my first campaign. 20 when I realized that war is not glory and honor, but blood and screaming and impossible choices. I have spent 20 years being the king's sword, cutting where he points, and I am so tired of the weight of it I can barely stand. Silence fell between them, heavy and profound. Eleanor realized she was trembling, not with fear now, but with the shock of recognition. She had thought the Duke was simply another powerful man who would use her for his own ends. She had not expected to see her own desperation reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Then why do you continue? She asked softly. If you hate it so much, why not refuse? Because someone must try to end this war before it destroys everything. Because if men like me walk away, worse men fill the void. Because... He stopped, jaw working as if fighting words that wanted to escape. Because I do not know how to be anything else. Eleanor understood that feeling too well. How many times had she thought the same thing about her role as Lord Ashford's daughter? That she did not know how to be anything, except what was expected of her. I do not want to be sent back, she said, her voice breaking. Please, I would rather die than go back to that life. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. I will not send you back tonight, he said finally. But you must understand the position this puts me in. If word spreads that I am harboring Ashford's missing daughter, there will be consequences. Questions I cannot easily answer. Then do not harbor me. Forget you saw me. Let me disappear into the silence here. Would that I could. He moved toward the cellar steps, then paused, looking back at her. But we both know the world does not allow people like us to simply disappear. The question is what we do about it. He climbed the steps and was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in the cold darkness with her racing heart and the terrible knowledge that her secret was no longer safe. The Duke knew who she was. He held her fate in his scarred, battle-worn hands. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She paced her small cell, mind spinning through possibilities and consequences. The Duke had said he would not send her back tonight. But what about tomorrow? What about when his duty called louder than whatever sympathy he felt? Near midnight, she heard a soft knock on her door. Heart hammering, she opened it to find Sister Margaret standing in the corridor with a candle. Come with me, child. Quickly, Eleanor followed the older nun through the dark passages to Mother Superior Agnes's chamber. There she found the Duke waiting, still dressed in his travel-stained clothing. exhaustion written in every line of his body. Mother Superior sat at her desk, her expression grave. "Tell her," Mother Superior said to the Duke. He turned to Eleanor, and in the candlelight his scarred face looked older, wearier. "Riders arrived an hour ago. Lord Pemberton's men are in the village 3 miles south, asking questions about a young noblewoman seeking refuge. They will be here by midday tomorrow." Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "Then I must run again, hide somewhere else." "There is nowhere else," Mother Superior interrupted gently. "They are searching every religious house, every inn, every farm. Running will only make you easier to find." "Then what do I do?" Eleanor's voice rose with panic. "Let them take me? Return to Pemberton and pretend this never happened?" "No," the Duke said quietly. "You make a different choice." He stepped forward, his gray eyes intense. "I can protect you, not as a prisoner or a pawn, but as someone under my direct authority. If you agree to place yourself under the King's protection, through me, Pemberton cannot simply claim you. It would require royal dispensation to override it, and the King would never grant it," Eleanor said bitterly. "He wants my father's cooperation. Returning me to Pemberton ensures that alliance. Perhaps, or perhaps the King values having leverage over both Ashford and Pemberton, more than satisfying either of them." The Duke's expression hardened with determination. "It is a gamble, but it is the only play we have." Eleanor looked between the Duke and Mother Superior. Seeing the truth, neither wanted to speak aloud. This was not a perfect solution. It was simply the least terrible option in a situation with no good outcomes. "If I agree," Eleanor said slowly, "what happens to me? You would travel with my forces as a ward under royal protection. When we reach the King's court, your case would be presented formally. It would buy time, if nothing else." "Time for what?" The Duke met her gaze steadily. "Time to find a better answer than forcing you back into chains. I cannot promise more than that." Eleanor thought of her cell, the cold vegetables in her basket, the temporary sanctuary that was about to be shattered. She thought of Pemberton's cold eyes and her father's calculating smile. She thought of the Duke's admission of his own weariness, his own search for redemption. "Very well," she said, lifting her chin with all the dignity she could summon. "I place myself under your protection, Your Grace, and I pray we both do not come to regret this choice." The Duke nodded slowly. "As do I, Lady Eleanor. As do I." Dawn broke cold and gray over Thornwick Convent, casting long shadows across the courtyard where the Duke's men prepared for confrontation. Eleanor stood at her cell window, watching the organized chaos below. Soldiers checking weapons, horses being saddled, strategic positions being established. They were preparing for Lord Pemberton's arrival as if expecting a siege. Sister Margaret had brought Eleanor a clean dress that morning, simple but well made, more appropriate for a noblewoman than the rough servant's clothing she had been wearing. "If you must face them," the older nun had said quietly, "face them as who you truly are." Now Eleanor wore that dress, her dark hair braided and pinned in a style that marked her station, her spine straight, despite the fear coursing through her veins. She was done hiding. The Duke had offered her protection, but that protection would only hold if she showed strength, not weakness. A commotion at the gate drew her attention. Through the morning mist, she could see riders approaching, perhaps 20 men bearing the green and gold colors of House Pemberton. At their head rode a figure Eleanor recognized even from this distance. Lord Henry Pemberton himself, her betrothed, come to reclaim his wayward property. The Duke met them at the convent's outer gate, flanked by his senior officers. Eleanor could not hear the words exchanged, but she could see the tension in every line of both men's bodies. Pemberton was younger than the Duke, perhaps 28, handsome in a cold, aristocratic way, his fair hair perfectly groomed even after days of travel. He sat his gray horse with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted, until Eleanor had run. After several minutes of heated discussion, Mother Superior Agnes appeared at Eleanor's door. "They are demanding to see you. The Duke requests your presence in the chapter house. He says," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "he says it is time to make your choice known publicly." Eleanor's hands trembled as she smoothed her dress, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "Then let us not keep them waiting, Reverend Mother." The chapter house had been transformed into an impromptu court. The Duke stood at one end, his officers arranged behind him in a show of military authority. Lord Pemberton occupied the opposite end with his men, his handsome face twisted with barely contained rage. Between them, Mother Superior had placed a simple wooden chair, neutral ground, where Eleanor would make her stand. As Eleanor entered, every eye turned to her. She walked slowly, deliberately, refusing to hurry or cower. When she reached the chair, she did not sit. Instead, she stood behind it, one hand resting on its back, and faced the assembled men with all the dignity her 22 years could command. "Lady Eleanor," Pemberton's voice dripped with false courtesy poisoned by genuine anger. "How relieved I am to finally find you. Your father has been beside himself with worry. When you vanished on our wedding day—" "I did not vanish, Lord Pemberton," Eleanor interrupted, her voice clear and strong. "I left. There is a significant difference." Pemberton's jaw tightened. "You abandoned your duty, your family, your sworn oath before God and witnesses. Do you have any idea the humiliation you caused? The scandal? I am aware of the inconvenience my freedom has caused you, my lord." "Inconvenience?" Pemberton took a step forward, his composure cracking. "You made a mockery of me before the entire realm. Our families had an agreement I never consented to," Eleanor said firmly. "An agreement made between men about a woman as if she were livestock to be traded. I simply declined to participate in my own sale. You had no right." "I had every right." Eleanor's voice rose with passion she could no longer contain. "I am a human being with thoughts and will and desires of my own. I am not property to be signed over in a contract. I am not a broodmare to strengthen political alliances. I am a person, Lord Pemberton, and I have the right to say no." Silence fell over the chapter house. Several of the Duke's men shifted uncomfortably while Pemberton's face had gone red with fury. Mother Superior watched from the corner, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes showing approval. "You speak of rights," Pemberton said, his voice dangerously quiet now. "But what of obligations? What of the sacred bonds of family and faith? What of the damage your selfishness has caused?" "Damage?" Eleanor laughed, the sound bitter. "The only thing I damaged was your pride, my lord. Our marriage would have been a misery for me and a mere transaction for you. You do not love me. You do not even know me. You wanted the Ashford alliance and the lands that came with it. I simply refused to be the coin that purchased them. This is absurd." Pemberton turned to the Duke, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Your Grace, this woman is my legal betrothed. The contracts are signed and witnessed. I demand you return her to her family and fulfill her obligations." The Duke studied Pemberton with those storm-gray eyes that missed nothing. "On what grounds do you make this demand, Lord Pemberton?" "On the grounds of law and custom. On the grounds of binding contracts." "Contracts signed by Lord Ashford and yourself," the Duke said quietly. "Not by Lady Eleanor. She was present at the signing ceremony, but did she actually put her seal to the document?" Pemberton hesitated, and in that hesitation, Eleanor saw the truth. Her father signed on her behalf. Pemberton said finally, "As is common perhaps, but not legally binding without the lady's consent if she is of age." The Duke's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Lady Eleanor is 22 years old. She required no guardian's signature. If she did not consent to the marriage, the contract is questionable at best." "This is ridiculous legal maneuvering," Pemberton snarled. "Everyone knows the marriage was agreed upon. Her running away does not void." "Actually," Mother Superior Agnes interrupted softly, "it might. Canon law is quite clear on the matter of consent in marriage. A woman forced to wed against her will has grounds for annulment. Running away before the ceremony is a rather dramatic statement of non-consent." Pemberton whirled on her. "You would support this rebellion against proper order? A woman defying her family and her betrothed? "I support the principle that vows made under duress are not binding before God," Mother Superior replied calmly. "And I support the right of women to have some say in their own fates, my lord. Revolutionary concepts, I know." The Duke's scarred face showed the ghost of a smile at Mother Superior's dry tone, but it faded quickly as he returned his attention to Pemberton. "Regardless of the legal questions, Lord Pemberton, there is a more immediate issue. Lady Eleanor has placed herself under my protection as a ward of the crown. Any attempt to remove her by force would be an act of aggression against the king's authority. The king would never support this farce. Perhaps not. Perhaps he would see the value in keeping both the Ashford and Pemberton families in a state of uncertain obligation, rather than solidifying their alliance through marriage. The Duke's voice hardened. Or perhaps he would simply appreciate having leverage over Lord Ashford, who has been suspiciously neutral in a war where neutrality looks remarkably like treason. Pemberton went very still, the implications clear. If Eleanor's status was uncertain, her father could not complete his alliance with Pemberton. If Ashford was under suspicion of supporting the rebellion, his cooperation would be needed. Eleanor had become a political asset, rather than a simple runaway bride. "You would use her as a pawn," Pemberton said, accusation heavy in his voice. "I would give her a choice," the Duke corrected. "Something neither you nor her father ever did." He turned to Eleanor, and in his gray eyes she saw understanding, recognition, and something deeper. Respect. "Lady Eleanor, you have heard the positions. Lord Pemberton claims you are bound by contract to marry him. I offer you the protection of the crown, which would delay that marriage indefinitely while the legal questions are resolved. But you should understand what each choice means." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Explain them to me, Your Grace." "If you go with Lord Pemberton, you will be returned to your father's house. The marriage will proceed regardless of your wishes. Your life will be what your family and your husband decree it to be. You will have comfort, status, and security, but no freedom. And if I accept your protection, you will travel with my forces to the king's court. Your case will be presented formally. The king may support your choice or order you to fulfill the contract. There are no guarantees. But during that time, you will have a voice in your own fate. You will be heard, even if ultimately you are not heeded." Eleanor looked between the two men. Pemberton with his cold anger and wounded pride, the Duke with his scarred face and weary understanding. One represented the life she had fled, the world of obligations and ownership. The other represented uncertainty, risk, and the slim possibility of genuine choice. But there was something else in the Duke's eyes that made her decision easier. He had shared his own burden of guilt and weariness. He had admitted his own struggle with duty versus conscience. He had offered protection not as a claim of ownership, but as an acknowledgement of her humanity. "I choose to remain under the Duke's protection," Eleanor said clearly, so everyone in the room could hear. "I will travel to the king's court and present my case. If I must ultimately fulfill this contract, let it be by royal decree and not by being dragged back like escaped livestock." Pemberton's control finally shattered completely. "You foolish girl. You think the Duke protects you out of nobility? He wants leverage over your father. He wants to use you against Ashford. You are still a pawn, just a different player's pawn." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged. "But at least I am a pawn who gets to move herself occasionally. That is more freedom than I would have as your wife, my lord." The Duke stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between Eleanor and Pemberton. "The matter is decided. Lady Eleanor travels under my protection. Any attempt to interfere will be treated as an act against the crown. You may file formal protest with the king if you wish, Lord Pemberton. But for now, she stays with me." For a moment, Eleanor thought Pemberton might order his men to attack. His hand went to his sword, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. But he was outnumbered, and even wounded pride was not worth starting a battle he could not win. "This is not over," Pemberton said, his voice shaking. "The king will hear of this. Your father will hear of this." He pointed at Eleanor with a trembling hand. "You have made powerful enemies today, Lady Eleanor. I hope your precious freedom is worth the price you will pay." He turned and strode from the chapter house, his men following. Through the windows, Eleanor watched them mount their horses and ride away, taking her old life with them. She felt no regret, only a strange lightness, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from her chest. When the sound of hoofbeats had faded, Mother Superior approached Eleanor and took her hands. "You were very brave, my child." "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted. "Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear." The old nun squeezed her hands gently. "Your road will not be easy. The king may not support you. Your family will not forgive you. But you spoke your truth, and that matters." Eleanor nodded, blinking back tears. She had found sanctuary here for a brief time, and she would miss the silence and the simplicity. But she had also learned something important in this cold stone convent by the sea. She had learned her own strength. The Duke approached after Mother Superior withdrew. Up close, in the better light of day, Eleanor could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the cost of decisions made and battles fought. But there was something else there, too. A spark of something that might have been hope. "We leave at first light tomorrow," he said quietly. "The journey to the King's court will take 2 weeks, possibly 3 if the weather worsens. I cannot promise what awaits you there." "I know," Eleanor said, "but thank you for giving me this chance, for seeing me as more than a political asset. I see you as someone fighting for the same thing I am, the right to choose what we become rather than accepting what the world demands we be." His scarred face softened slightly. "Perhaps we can help each other find that. Or perhaps we will both fail spectacularly, but at least we will fail on our own terms." Eleanor found herself smiling despite everything. "Is that your idea of encouragement, Your Grace? I'm a soldier, not a poet. We deal in realistic assessments rather than false hope." But his gray eyes held warmth now, and understanding. "Rest today. Gather what strength you can. Tomorrow we ride toward an uncertain future, Lady Eleanor. I hope you are ready." "I am," Eleanor said, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. She had been running in fear for weeks, hiding in shadows, denying who she was. Now she would face her fate head-on, with her eyes open and her voice clear. That night, Eleanor stood one last time at her cell window, looking out at the dark sea. Tomorrow she would leave this sanctuary, this brief respite from the world. She did not know what the king would decide. She did not know if she would ultimately be forced back into the marriage she fled. But she knew she had found something valuable in this forgotten convent. She had found herself, her voice, her strength. And she had found an unlikely ally in a battle-scarred duke who carried his own ghosts and sought his own redemption. They were both broken in their own ways, both fighting against the roles the world had forced upon them. Perhaps together, they could forge something new from the fragments of their shattered expectations. Or perhaps they would both be crushed by the weight of duty and tradition and power. But either way, Eleanor would face it standing tall, speaking truth, refusing to be silent or invisible ever again. The moon emerged from behind clouds, casting silver light across the waves. Eleanor took a deep breath of salt air and made a silent promise to herself. No matter what tomorrow brought, she would never again let anyone reduce her to property or possession. She would never again accept being owned. She was Eleanor Ashford, runaway bride, defiant daughter, woman who chose her own path, and that, she realized with quiet certainty, was worth any price the world might demand. Tomorrow she would ride toward an uncertain future, but she would ride with her head high, her voice strong, and her spirit finally gloriously free.